Welcome back to Farmyard Care, where we take the everyday work of raising animals and caring for the land and turn it into something more practical, sustainable, and rewarding. If you have ever looked at your monthly feed bill and felt that heavy sigh come out before you even realized it, you are not alone. And if you have stepped out to the coop on a cold winter morning hoping for fresh eggs, only to find the nesting boxes empty, you know exactly how frustrating backyard chicken keeping can sometimes feel. Every flock owner wants the same thing: strong, healthy birds, steady egg production, beautiful eggs, and chickens that live long, active lives. But here is the question worth asking. What if the answer is not another expensive supplement sitting on a feed store shelf? What if one of the most powerful tools for improving your flock has been around for thousands of years, used long before modern farming ever existed? Today we are going to look closely at one of the most useful old-time practices in homesteading: fermenting chicken feed. This simple method can help improve egg production, support your chicken's immune systems, make their feed easier to digest, and save you a surprising amount of money over time. So if you are ready to get more value from every scoop of feed and give your flock something truly beneficial, let's get started. Part 1. The alchemy of fermentation. What is it? To understand why fermented feed can make such a big difference in a backyard flock, we first need to understand what it really is. Fermented chicken feed is not just wet feed. It is feed that has gone through a natural biological process, where wild cultures and yeasts break down the complex sugars and starches in grains and other organic ingredients without oxygen. This is where many beginners get confused. Pouring water over feed and letting it soften is only soaking. That may make the feed easier to eat, but it is not true fermentation. Real fermentation happens when beneficial lactic acid bacteria become active in the mixture. These tiny living organisms feed on carbohydrates and produce lactic acid and acetic acid. As they work, the feed changes. Its pH can drop from around neutral, about 6.5, down to a more acidic level, often around 4.2 to 4.5. And that matters more than many people realize. Grains naturally contain phytic acid, also called phytate. This compound can bind to important minerals such as phosphorus, zinc, and magnesium, making them much harder for chickens to use. So even if those nutrients are present in the feed, your birds may not be getting the full benefit. Fermentation helps break down these anti-nutritional factors. In simple terms, it unlocks nutrients that were trapped inside the grain and makes them easier for the bird's body to absorb. You are partly pre-digesting the feed before it ever reaches the chicken. That is why a simple scoop of grain can become far more valuable after fermentation. It turns ordinary feed into something richer, more digestible, and much more useful for your flock. Part 2. Superior health and the golden egg. The benefits. Now that we know what fermented feed is, the next question is simple. What actually happens when your chickens eat it? This is where the benefits become very practical. When hens consume feed rich in lactic acid and beneficial microbes, their digestive system can work more efficiently. Inside the gut, there are tiny finger-like structures called intestinal villi. These structures help absorb nutrients from food. With better gut support, these villi can become more effective, giving the chicken more surface area to pull nutrition from the same amount of feed. But the value of fermentation is not only about absorption. It also helps create a less friendly environment for harmful bacteria. The acidity produced during fermentation can support the crop and digestive tract by discouraging acid-sensitive pathogens such as Salmonella, Escherichia coli, and Campylobacter. In one scientific study, among 10 egg samples from chickens fed regular feed, 2 tested positive for E. coli, while the fermented feed group showed much lower contamination and almost no trace of Salmonella. So what does that mean for the eggs you collect? Research comparing multiple trials has shown that hens fed fermented feed can have a statistically significant increase in laying rate, with one analysis showing about a 2.11% improvement. That may sound small at first, but across a flock and over a full season, it adds up. The eggs themselves can improve too. Shells may become thicker, which means fewer cracked eggs in the basket. Albumin quality, often measured by the Haw unit, can also improve. And because fermentation may help chickens absorb carotenoids more efficiently, many keepers notice yolks becoming deeper, richer, and more golden orange instead of pale yellow. So when we talk about fermented feed, we are not only talking about feeding chickens. We are talking about helping them use their food better, supporting their gut, protecting their health, and producing eggs that feel more rewarding to bring into your kitchen. Part 3. The economics. Save big on feed. Now let's talk about the part every practical chicken keeper cares about, the feed bill. Can something as simple as adding water and allowing natural fermentation really save money? In many cases, yes. A careful on-farm study from the SARE program at Foothills Farm followed 1,000 pastured-laying hens. The results were very interesting. The birds fed fermented feed laid 9% more eggs over the season compared with birds eating dry feed. Even more surprising, the birds that received only hydrated unfermented feed actually laid 11% fewer eggs. That same Foothills Farm study found that the fermented feed system was 11% more profitable overall, even after accounting for the extra labor. For a homesteader, that is important because a method is only truly useful if it works in real life, not just in theory. The reason is fairly simple. Fermentation helps unlock more nutrition from the feed, so the chickens may absorb more energy and protein from each bite. When feed expands and becomes more digestible, birds often feel satisfied with less dry feed than before. If your flock normally eats a pound of dry feed, once that feed is expanded and fermented, they may need much less dry volume to get useful nutrition. There is also less waste. Dry feed often gets scratched, flicked, and spilled onto the ground. Once it becomes a moist porridge-like mash, chickens cannot scatter it as easily. More of what you paid for goes into the bird instead of being lost in the bedding or dirt. Better digestion, less waste, improved production, and lower feed costs. That is why fermented feed has become such a powerful tool for people who want to raise chickens in a smarter, more sustainable way. Part 4. The 3 simple steps to fermenting. The how-to. Now that you understand why fermented feed can be so useful, let's get practical. The good news is that this process is much easier than many people imagine. You do not need expensive equipment or a complicated system. You only need feed, clean water, the right container, and a little patience. Step 1. Choose your feed and container. You can ferment the feed you are already using, whether it is pellets, crumbles, or whole grains. But from experience, whole grains and unprocessed seeds often work best because they naturally carry more of the wild yeast that helps start the fermentation process. Place the feed into a clean container. Glass jars, food-grade BPA-free plastic buckets, or stoneware containers are all good choices. Avoid metal containers because once the feed becomes acidic, it can react with the metal and spoil the batch. Do not fill the container all the way to the top. Fill it only about 1/3 to 1/2 full. Once the water is added, the feed will swell, soften, and expand much more than beginners expect. Step 2. Add water and a little help. Pour clean, non-chlorinated water over the feed. This matters because chlorine is designed to kill bacteria, and in this case, we need beneficial bacteria to grow. If tap water is your only option, leave it sitting uncovered for about 24 hours so the chlorine can evaporate. Add enough water to keep the feed fully submerged by about 1 to 2 inches. For larger flocks, a useful starting ratio is 1 part feed to about 1.3 to 2 parts water, depending on the type of feed you use. If you want to speed things up, you can add a splash of raw, unpasteurized apple cider vinegar, or use a little liquid from a previous fermented batch. That method is often called backslopping, and it helps the next batch ferment faster. Step 3. Cover, stir, and wait. Cover the container with a loose lid, cheesecloth, or a clean towel secured over the top. Do not seal it tightly. Fermentation produces carbon dioxide, and that gas needs a way to escape. A sealed container can build pressure and create a mess. Keep the container in a dark place at room temperature, ideally around 60 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Stir the mixture once or twice a day to keep everything evenly wet and active. By the 2nd or 3rd day, you should start seeing small bubbles rising to the surface. The feed should smell tangy, slightly sweet, and a little like sourdough. That is the sign you are looking for. The feed is alive, properly fermented, and ready for your flock. Part 5. Serving the feast to your flock. Once the feed is bubbling and has that fresh, tangy smell, it is time to serve it. Because fermented feed is wet, thick, and heavier than dry feed, it works best in wide, shallow plastic or rubber dishes. This allows more birds to eat at the same time and helps prevent the dish from tipping over. You can strain off some of the extra liquid with a slotted spoon, or you can serve it as a thick mash. Both methods work. The main goal is to offer a texture your chickens can eat easily without wasting much. For the first feeding, start with about 1/2 cup of fermented feed per chicken. Then watch how quickly they eat it. A good rule is to give only what the flock can clean up within 15 to 30 minutes. Do not leave wet fermented feed sitting in the run all day, especially during hot weather. Once exposed to open air, heat, dirt, and insects, it can spoil faster. It can also attract flies, ants, rodents, and other unwanted visitors around the coop. And that cloudy liquid left in the jar or bucket should not be wasted. That liquid is full of beneficial microbes. You can use it to start the next batch, and that next batch will usually ferment much faster. If you have extra, it can also be used for pigs, added to compost, or diluted and used in the garden. Part 6. Troubleshooting mold Vs. Calm yeast. Now let's talk about the part that worries almost every beginner. What if something grows on top of the ferment? Does that mean the whole batch is dangerous? This is where you need to know the difference between calm yeast and mold. They are not the same thing, and recognizing the difference can save you a lot of confusion. If you see a thin, flat white or cream-colored film on the surface, especially one that looks wrinkled or like wet tissue paper, do not panic. That is usually calm yeast. It often appears when oxygen reaches the surface of the feed. It is generally harmless to chickens, though it can make the feed smell or taste a little stronger than usual. If calm yeast appears, simply skim it off the top, stir the feed, and make sure the grains stay fully submerged under the liquid. In most cases, the batch is still usable. But if you see anything fuzzy, hairy, raised, or brightly colored green, blue, black, pink, or anything that looks clearly like mold, stop right there. That is not something to risk. Mold is a serious problem because it can produce mycotoxins. These toxins may be invisible and odorless, and scraping the mold off the surface does not make the feed safe. Mold roots and toxins can spread deeper into the feed than you can see. Feeding moldy feed to chickens can damage organs, weaken the immune system, reduce performance, and in severe cases, even kill birds. So remember this simple rule. If it is fuzzy, colorful, or smells rotten foul, throw out the entire batch, wash and sanitize the container, and start again. Keep the feed submerged under the liquid, stir regularly, and you will greatly reduce the chance of mold taking over. Part 7. Life lessons from the coop. So why take this extra step? Why spend a few minutes each day stirring a bucket or jar of wet grain when dry feed is so easy to scoop and pour? Because fermenting chicken feed is not only a small trick for saving money, it is a reminder of how real healthy farm systems work. When we ferment feed, we are working with the invisible life around us, the beneficial microbes that help turn simple grains into something more active, digestible, and nourishing. In a world where so much food and farming has become processed, packaged, and rushed, fermentation brings us back to an older kind of wisdom. It teaches patience. It shows us that strong health does not always come from a factory-made solution, but often from a living, balanced system right in our own backyard. When we care for the microscopic life in the soil, in the compost, and even in the feed bucket, we support the animals that depend on that life. And when those animals are healthier, they give back to us through stronger bodies, better production, and beautiful eggs that help feed our families. And really, isn't that what a good homestead is meant to be? A living cycle where the land, the animals, and the people all support one another in a natural, sustainable way. Outro. So here is my challenge for you. Take a jar, add some feed, pour in clean water, and watch what happens over the next few days. Your chickens may benefit from it. Your feed bill may feel a little lighter. And your family may notice the difference when those rich eggs reach the table. Have you ever tried fermenting feed for your flock? Did your chickens rush to it right away? Or did they stare at it like you had offered them something strange? Share your experience in the comments below. If this video helped you and you want to keep learning practical ways to build a healthier, more sustainable farmyard, make sure to like, subscribe to Farmyard Care, and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss the next helpful guide. Until next time, keep growing, keep learning, and take good care of your farmyard. Bye, everyone.